Hello and welcome to Between the Rows. I'm your host, Dave Bedard. This week's show is brought to you by...
I've been farming my whole life, and the one thing you can always count on is change. And now there's a new generation of inoculants from Lalaman Plant Care. New engineered granules and Lalfix spherical for pulses and soybeans that provide improved handling and accurate metering. New Rhizobium and Lalfix Pro Yield that deliver improved nitrogen fixation and iron uptake in soybeans. I've seen a lot of change, but this Lalaman company, well, this changes everything. Contact your Lalaman sales representative today.
Welcome back. I'm Dave Bedard. Well, even though it's about as far away from summer fair season as you can get and all the amusement parks are closed, we're still going to be riding the roller coaster today. Of course, I'm speaking metaphorically about canola markets, and we're going to talk to Glenn Halleck of Markets Farm about what's up and down and back up with that.
Imports have skyrocketed to China. They're trying to buy as much oil seeds and grain as they can.
Meanwhile, our neighbors south of the border have been on a political and emotional roller coaster now for months, and we are going to talk to U.S. farm writer and columnist Alan Gebert about the outgoing and incoming administration's handling of the agriculture and food files.
The amount of dairy exported from the U.S. to Canada is such a piddling little amount here. It's like they made a mountain out of a molehill.
But first, you'll remember that last week on the show we met a professional bull rider and learned how he keeps focus on his sport over this crazy COVID winter and about his hopes for competing this coming summer. This week we've rolled out a similar barrel of questions for a professional chuck wagon driver that you may have heard of by the name of Jamie Laboucaine.
There's the horn and the charge is underway.
Once that horn goes, after that, for myself, it's all about just releasing my energy.
And Jamie Laboucaine quick on the number 2 barrel. Radiant Technologies out of town in a hurry. And in behind him comes Jerry Bedard.
And then once you get into that first turn, you kind of can gauge yourself, whether you're ahead and you want to stay a little bit off the rail, whether guys are on top of you and you got to run tighter to the rail than maybe you'd like.
Here comes Duggar on the outside. Jerry Bedard, Birchcliff Energy.
And the first part of the race is basically just jockeying for position.
Shaw GMC as they set up for the backstretch drive, and it's Jamie Laboucaine, Radiant Technology.
Getting set up for that third, fourth turn. Once you hit that fourth turn, that's when you decide, well, I've kind of held on to my horses there for most of the race. Now it's time to let them go.
Doug Irvine and Jordy Mike, rain to rain like a runaway train.
And then it's just all about laying it on the line, yelling, letting your energy flow. And
all behind, and here they come for the home stretch drive. Jamie Laboucaine with all the speed you need. Jerry Bedard opens them up and notch to the wire.
There's adrenaline rush. There's a lot going on, a lot of competitors, a lot of horses, and it's probably one of the greatest thrills that a person can experience, especially in those really good, tight races.
Jamie Laboucaine answers the call. They're not going to catch him. Jamie Laboucaine by 3/4. Jerry Bedard rolls in ahead of Doug Irvine.
Well, how I got into chuck wagon racing was, I'm a second generation chuck wagon driver. My dad, Brian Laboucaine, raced. His rookie year was 1970, so he was in the sport for 44 years before he retired in 2014. So I was a part of it my whole life. I've been on the road with him since the time I was a baby, and grew up wanting to do this. I remember just shortly after I graduated, we were driving home from a show, and Dad turned and looked at me and said, "Do you want to drive?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Well, we'll start, finding you a wagon and get you practicing." And by next year I was already driving. Maybe it was a little bit early for me, looking back, but I don't regret it, a single bit. It just gave me that little bit extra experience. Dealing with 4 high-strung thoroughbreds with different minds, and you're trying to get them to do the same thing every time. And I mean, there's sometimes you get those magical outfits that they just give you the same trip every time and everything goes perfect every time, but those are very rare. So having the ability to read the situation, get these horses into the barrels properly, read them properly, knowing where they're going and what position they should be, the more experience you get, the better chance I think you have of reading the situation properly, making the right call, and reacting quick.
He's chasing a wall of wagons. The chuck wagon surrounding him. Thoroughbred green team comes around the corner.
Well, you know, when COVID arrived, we kind of all seen it coming down the pipe, and my wife said to me, "Well, what do you think of this COVID thing? Do you think it's going to be, a big thing?" And I said to her, "Oh, it's probably not going to, add up to much, but as it got closer and closer to the racing season, is kind of exactly when everything started to hit like really, really hard. We all started realizing, wow, well, this is serious. Like, we're going to have to prepare and get ready." And I said to a guy, I said, "Well, what happens if the Calgary Stampede gets canceled?" "Oh no, that's not going to happen."
And the City of Calgary has declared a state of local emergency. These steps, as well as our continuing concern for the health and well-being of our community, means we are unable to host the 2020 edition of the Calgary Stampede. As a community celebration, the cancellation of our annual event comes with our community and public health and safety front of mind. It's hard, but it's the right thing to do.
Calgary decided to cancel the Stampede, and the rest of our shows were really up in the air. So we started contacting sponsors, and then one of our main sponsors had to back out because they couldn't financially afford to go on. Couldn't really ask our other sponsors to keep going. We had guys committed, but I mean, without a season ahead of you can't really expect money to start coming in. Still had a whole pile of expenses coming in, and without a bunch of our sponsorship money that we normally count on to help the training and everything else that goes along with owning 30 head of thoroughbreds, we knew that we'd be financially in a lot of trouble. And then after that, it was just like any other business. I imagine we were just in financial scrambling, trying to put the money in the right spots so we could survive this for the long haul. The upcoming season is an interesting one, probably one a lot different from even last season. Last season, it was just kind of, we all didn't see it coming, so we didn't really plan for it. Whereas this year, we kind of know what to expect. So, I mean, a lot of guys are going to want to go, going to want to race in some shape or form. Our own association, the CPCA, has a full schedule planned. We don't really know what it's going to look like because of restrictions, whether we're going to allowed to have fans. If we are, how many? We got to try to keep this sport alive. So if we can have some shape or form of season, that's kind of what we're all shooting for, and hopefully we can have a full one. But I guess we're just going to have to see how everything kind of plays out, and hopefully we'll be on the racetrack for a full race season. But as it looks right now, it's pretty up in the air still.
There's a horn and the charge is underway. Stoves go in, Outriders mount up. Ross Knight from the two barrels, Jason Glass from the outside, Jim Knight and Cliff Cunningham to the backside. And that's how they leave town at a high rate of equine acceleration. Ross Knight has got that rail position with Royal Wellfoot. Jason's on the...
You've been listening to our discussion with CPCA chuckwagon driver Jamie Laboucaine. We caught up with Jamie on his farm just outside St. Walburg up in northwestern Saskatchewan. You're listening to Between the Rows. I'm your host this week, Dave Bedard.
Yesterday, it's a very small number, but it's still cattle coming in. We have tremendous amounts of supply, cattle, and all, but generally speaking, supply, tremendous supply. Our farmers have done an incredible job, and now the distribution is being made much better than it has been, and better. I think it'll end up being much better than it's ever been, Zippy. But I'm saying, why are we bringing in cattle? Old trade deals that were made a long time ago. Why are we bringing in cattle from other countries when we have so much ourselves? Now, in some cases, I thought your answer was very good. They've been great allies. They've been working with us for many years. Sometimes we needed the cattle, and sometimes we don't. It's a farming business. But I would say, generally speaking, unless this is a country that really has been with us, we shouldn't be taking their cattle.
Well, that was an unpredictable moment in an unpredictable presidential term. It later turned out that when he made those remarks in May last year, Donald Trump didn't necessarily mean cutting off cattle from Canada or Mexico, even though those two countries are responsible for all the cattle entering the U.S. Now Trump is out, Joe Biden is in, and here to help us Canadians make sense of it all, we have U.S. farm writer and columnist Alan Giebert. Mr. Giebert, hello, and welcome to Between the Rows.
Well, thank you very much.
Now, I remember when I first started in this business back in the 90s, it seemed to me that farmers in the States, might not break down politically all that differently from the rest of the U.S. population, that farmers could expect both parties to cater to them. But since then, and certainly in the past 4 years, it seems to have pretty much become an article of faith in U.S. politics that farmers were either the Republican base or President Trump's base. Am I off base there? Was I being naive back in the day, or?
No, I think you're being quite accurate. And in fact, I would take your mid to late 90s data and move it all the way up to maybe 2010, 2012. And I can say that because when you look at state data like rural states, big farm states like, for instance, Iowa, half of Iowa voted, half the counties, there's 99 counties in Iowa, half of them voted Democratic in 2012, half of them voted Republican in 2012. This year, in 2020, 94 of those rural counties voted red or Republican, and 5 voted Democratic. That's how fast, rapid, and deep the split has occurred.
Has there been any thought about what sort of flipped farmers one way or the other? Or
not a lot of deep polling on it, but you might suspect the usual suspects. For instance, we've concentrated a lot of ag assets in the very few, very big, very wealthy hands. Those people have a great deal of political power in almost any political economy. They then concentrated even further the wealth, and they can pick and choose, pay or back the candidates that they want. And what they've been doing broadly across the U.S. Farm Belt is supporting what they quote libertarian or quote free market candidates, or people who just basically do what the bigs want them to do. So that's where you see a lot of the authority and power. And then, of course, rural America is emptying out rather rapidly of wealth and of voters. So it doesn't take a whole lot of voters in many of these rural communities to change the direction or change the whole election.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the outgoing president then, and when he first came in. Was when back in 2016, 2017. Now, was there an expectation from farmers for what he was going to do heading into his term?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, between Donald Trump and American farmers, it was an openly or nakedly transactional election. You give me your votes, I'll give you whatever you want. And that's pretty much the way it worked. And when you see, a powerful group of farm and ranch groups get together, a powerful force like that, you can move mountains in rural America. And, we have 2 or 3 large farm groups here, the American Farm Bureau being the largest. They claim to represent. The number is almost, insignificant because it doesn't make any sense. 6 to 8 million farmers when we know there's not that many farmers in America. And then you've got everybody else. So when you want farm or rural votes, you go to the American Farm Bureau Federation Convention, and where did Donald Trump go 4 years in a row? So they are, very libertarian, very open markets, very free trade. The government help that they want is, just cash, uninhibited, hinged American taxpayer money. Don't tell us what we can do with it. And so Trump delivered for them, and they absolutely loved it. And they voted overwhelmingly for him. 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 farmers voted for Trump in many of these communities.
So it's fair to say then that they did get what they wanted.
They got everything that they wanted, plus in the last 4 years, $118 billion in farm program benefits. That's a record in any 4-year period, with the exception of the initial freedom to farm years back in the late 90s, when America just dropped any pretense of any farm programs and went with just straight, giving cash to farmers.
And now I'd like to ask too about just from the Canadian perspective. Of course, I mean the USMCA, or up here we call it the CUSMA trade deal. There was some anxiety up here, of course, about what it would mean for Canada's supply managed sectors. Dairy, eggs, poultry. But with the export-oriented sectors, beef, grain, and whatnot, it was more sort of hoping that the status quo would continue. And a new NAFTA did seem pretty high on Donald Trump's list of priorities. But did U.S. farmers, I mean, from what you were seeing, I mean, did they seem all that worried about it?
I don't think so. I think the smart, politically savvy farm groups used it as a crowbar, to get more what they wanted, particularly in the dairy sector. But your listeners may be well aware, the amount of dairy exported from the U.S. to Canada is such a piddling little amount here. It's like they made a mountain out of a molehill. So none of those factors had anything really to do with anything other than it was a doable trade deal. Everybody agreed that it needed to be updated in certain aspects. So Donald Trump was going to get it. Joe Biden would have gotten if he was president. They didn't, or Hillary Clinton would have gotten if she was president. It really wasn't that big of a deal. And I would suggest that you wouldn't have gotten that different of a deal under the Democrats.
And the tariff war that went on between the U.S. and China, by comparison, certainly loomed large over U.S. agriculture and, by extension, agriculture elsewhere in the West. By comparison, I mean, it certainly weighed on commodity prices for a long time. But from where I sit, though, I have to admit I couldn't really get a good read on whether the U.S.-China trade war really cost the Trump administration politically.
Not with farmers, it didn't, and that's the irony, or perhaps the great anomaly or paradox with the Trump administration. There's little question that the trade war with China in the U.S. cost American ag exports dearly for 2 years. I mean, you saw 1 year the U.S. ag exports to China be cut in half, but Trump magically, because of his power, I don't know, tight link to farmers, could convince farmers that anything we did to beat down or hold up or suggest that maybe we were taking advantage of China a little bit was a good thing for them, even if it cost them exports. And it did. Now, of course, we're exporting all of this stuff, but it's not because of the trade war. It's because of COVID and what really happened over the past year, 2 years prior to COVID in China, and the demolition, really, of the wholesale demolition of their hog herd and their corn and soybean base. So in making up for that, our exports just boomed to China. Ironically, they're booming with Trump not in office, and the trade war still semi going on a little bit. And Joe Biden's in no hurry to relinquish that either, I might add. He sees it, just today he again announced, a Buy American program. So he's on that train somewhat. I don't think he can stay on there very long, though.
So here we have President Joe Biden now, and we've got Tom Vilsack tapped to return as his ag secretary. Are there any sort of significant changes in the very near term, at least, that are expected as to how U.S. federal public policy is going to affect farmers?
Probably not. I mean, the Farm Bill that's in force right now is written and signed in 2018. It's in place till 2023. There's not a whole lot that can be done. Congress is loath to open those bills back up to make minor changes. If there is another big COVID package that comes through Congress, look for Vilsack and Biden to use that package to reemphasize or newly emphasize programs that they both like the Conservation Reserve Program here in the United States, that double the acreage from 20 million acres of retired U.S. land or long-term retired for 10 years probably be doubled to 40 million, so that you could use it somewhat as a buffer for supply management without even calling it supply management. And the other thing that is going to be happening, I would think that in this incoming administration is you're going to see a lot of food aid. Already, Biden has increased food aid benefits to hungry and qualifying families with children by 15%, which is long, long overdue. American food benefits are pathetically small. A family of 4 under the level of poverty only qualifies for about $350 a month of food aid. So at 15% more of that is only $50. It's so small. So I would see those two big things happening very rapidly.
And just to get back to what you said about the CRP too, I mean, it seems at a glance that the Biden administration is rather keen to to tie its ag policy in with environmental policy. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, and it should be. It was always that way. And then Freedom to Farm in the late 90s knocked all of that out, called cross compliance. If you wanted to join the farm programs, which incidentally in the US are all voluntary, you don't have to join them. But if you wanted the benefits, then you had to give back to the public some public good for their public money. And that meant you couldn't farm. We call it HEL land, HEL, highly erodible land. You had to follow certain water conservation and safe water rules. And, you had to follow statewide rules also on, CAFOs, manure management, items like that. But that to reinstate that would be a bitter blow to many farmers who now for a generation have not had to do it. But I've been a long proponent of, if you're taking public funds, the public should get some good out of that. And that's one thing that is easily done and frankly needs to be done from a national standpoint when it comes to conservation and soil management.
And there's also been some discussion about, well, of course, I mean, I've been following this for the past 4 years as well. There's been discussion about the biofuel sector as far as waivers for refiners and whatnot. Just the power that any power that agriculture seemed to sort of have. It seemed to kind of go in when it came to biofuel policy. It did seem to kind of come and go in waves there.
Well, the Trump administration got away with absolute murder in the application of biofuels policy in American agriculture. They enforced it when they wanted, which was never, it seemed to me. And they always talked a good game that they were biofuels' best friend. Whenever Trump or his administration officials went to the Midwest, where you find most of the ethanol industry. But they never really ever delivered. And in fact, their statistics just recently came out that Iowa's ethanol production, and Iowa leads the nation in ethanol production, fell by 500 million gallons last year. Out of 14 billion, 500 million is a lot of ethanol production to be idled. And moreover, it's not going to get any better. So whether the Trump administration knew it was doing a favor by preparing the ethanol industry for future trouble, I doubt it. But in the future, think of it this way. We saw American gasoline consumption fall in 2020 by 13%.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And so if you blend 10% of that to ethanol, then you can figure out how much the ethanol market shrank. Moreover, you have the rise of electric cars and, increasing fuel standards coming back in with the Biden administration. So you've probably, here in America, we've probably seen the highest level of gasoline sales ever. It's going to continue to fall. And now the U.S. ethanol industry is coming to the government and saying, we want 5% more of the gasoline market and raise the ethanol blend to 15%. Well, the gasoline companies are going to fight it tooth and nail. They're not going to get it. I would think the worst investment you can make in American agriculture right now is in ethanol. I would be heading for the exits if I were any investor in ethanol.
Has there been any sort of signal from the incoming administration, though, as far as where they will take ethanol policy?
Well, keep in mind that the first American primary of any U.S. presidential election is in Iowa.
That is true.
They all drink the ethanol there, my friend, every one of them. And Joe Biden has a particular thirst for it. So, well, he can promise everything. I will almost promise you that he'll back away from it by saying, well, look, my friend, conditions have changed. And he would be right. Conditions have changed dramatically.
Mm-hmm. And which dovetails nicely into talking about the pandemic. Are there any subsectors in U.S. farming that are still waiting on help for in dealing with the effects of the COVID pandemic and haven't yet gotten it?
Well, a great deal. My native Illinois is doing a little bit better as a state. The federal government response was discoordinated at best, uncoordinated at best, and just discouraging at worst. I mean, there was nobody in the federal government coordinated, so all the states ran around and tried to make their own policy and then fought each other over everything. So Illinois is doing pretty good, but it's a big state with a lot of political power. Where I live now in Wisconsin, it's doing very badly because it's a small state with very little political power. They have a Democratic governor, a Republican legislature, so they can't agree on what day it is, let alone how to fight this. And then I keep coming back to Iowa because I think it's representative of rural America and the ag-centered America. News came out today that it is the least tested state in America. So the COVID is rampant in Iowa. And as I've noted before, if you see infrastructure in rural America, people leaving, then the infrastructure leaves. So you have a long way to go between hospitals and doctors' offices in rural America, and therefore you have a terrible distribution problem. Now, I know Canada is long familiar with distances and infrastructure and created solutions.
Mm-hmm.
But we're in the United States where individual freedom is prized, and you can't tell us what to do, even if it hurts us.
Now, are U.S. farmers likely to seek out any more sort of ad hoc supports due directly to the pandemic, and how likely are they to get them if they do?
Oh, I can promise you 100% that they will try to get more. And the likelihood of them getting more will, in my view, will be tied to how much they want to concede. In other words, if you want $20 more billion, and that seems to be the number of the last two COVID assistance packages coming out of Washington that farmers got nationwide, then you're going to have to see more action in the way of, say, conservation reserve program, water quality program, small farm programs, food aid programs. The big boys, there's going to be a hard cap to the big boys because they're pigs at a trough. They just suck it all up, and the United States as a nation and as individuals got no benefit from it at all. You just got these big farms, the wherewithal up. You could have up to $900,000 in gross income and still receive full program benefits.
So this is something that we can definitely expect to keep an eye on in the months and at least the next 4 years ahead.
Right. I would say right now it looks like the Biden administration is going to have a very difficult time getting their proposed $1.9 trillion program through Congress. And if anything passes, the likelihood of it being one half of that amount, and by late March at the earliest, both things would probably be a miracle.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll certainly keep an eye on that. Mr. Alan Gebert, thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure.
Alan Gebert is the author of the Farm and Food File column that appears regularly in papers across the U.S. and Canada, including the Manitoba Co-operator. You're listening to Between the Rows. I'm your host this week, Dave Bedard. Well, in commodity markets this week, anyone who needed to know such things definitely learned why they call it the soy complex. If you're looking at a chart for ICE March canola, it's pretty clear there's been a lot of push and pull, sometimes simultaneously. And to explain that is why we have Glenn Halleck here from Glacier Markets Farm. Glenn, hi, and welcome back to Between the Rows.
Oh, hi, Dave. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, glad to have you here. So I am, in fact, looking at the chart for ICE March canola as we speak, and values still seem pretty high, but I'm getting a little seasick trying to follow this thing. What the heck happened this week?
Oh, things like the shortest way to say it, it's volatile. Last week, prices dropped about $25-30 a ton. Now, over the last few days of this week, they've shot up. Canola, the March contract earlier in the session today hit its daily limit. It went up $30 a ton. Now it came down a little. It gained about 17.5 bucks just on Tuesday. So it closed around $693.20, somewhere there's about. And like I say, the market is just volatile. You go to look at the prices and you just don't know what's going to be happening.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I was expecting canola to punch anywhere above $700 a ton, but it seems to have done so briefly today. So what's behind all this?
Part of it is there's going to be tight ending stocks, not only for a canola here in Canada, but also soybeans in the United States. Canola closely follows soybeans. If they go up, canola goes up. If they go down, and then of course canola goes down. And we have those tight ending stocks. There's great demand out of China. It wasn't very long ago we were worried about China not buying our canola.
Mm-hmm.
Now imports have skyrocketed to China. They're trying to buy as much oil seeds and grain as they can.
That seems kind of counterintuitive. I thought they were. Last I heard, they were still blocking us, or at least in some respects, aren't they? Or
oh no, imports are way up. Right now, we're sitting at almost 1.2 million tons so far this marketing year. That's up 113% compared to this time last year.
Wow. Okay. Now you mentioned soybeans as well. Now that there's obviously soybeans are bringing some support to bear on the markets. On canola markets? What's happening there?
Just like with our canolas, there's going to be tight ending stocks for soybeans. So people are trying to get what they can now. And again, it's not Chinese demand. China's been basically buying any bushel of soybeans they can out of the U.S. There too. The U.S. is making record exports to China.
Mm-hmm. Now, and it's not like I'm planning on cross-border shopping or taking a trip to Hawaii anytime soon. But you would think that the Canadian dollar would be putting some pressure on canola here as the dollar's been rising. Is that actually happening?
Yeah, the dollar's been sort of between 78 and 79 cents for the last few weeks, and that hasn't slowed down canola one bit. Usually when you get above that 75-cent mark, that's uh-oh territory. But no, the dollar, maybe stopped canola from going up a little bit, but not very much. It's an odd thing to see.
Mm-hmm. Now, looking at all this demand and sort of a relatively short supply. I mean, we've all heard the old saying, the cure for high prices is high prices. But when are high prices going to get high enough for the cure to kick in?
That remains to be seen. I've talked to a few traders, and they say canola's got to go much higher. It broke $700 earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
The record is, I think you got to go back to 2008 where it topped off at, I think, around 744, 745. Might we see that in the next few weeks, few months? That remains to be seen. Agriculture Canada pegged ending stocks at 1.2 million tons and 1 million tons for 2021-22. So we're looking at pretty tight things, and that might get guys wanting to boost that price to kind of kill a demand a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So that's basically what's the term that I'm looking for there. It's price sort of price control, or at least price
price rationing.
Price rationing. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, but we're now are we obviously we're not seeing any of that yet, or is this even with price rationing, or have people already tried to apply that to this principle or to this market?
We haven't really seen that yet. It's still in the offing, and maybe a few weeks to a few months before we might see prices really shoot up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess we'll have to keep an eye on that and see. Glenn, thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Dave.
Glenn Halleck is a reporter for Markets Farm, the commodity market reporting and analysis arm of Glacier FarmMedia. Check them out at marketsfarm.com. I'd like to thank Glenn today, as well as Bruce Thorson, for bringing us this week's visit with chuckwagon rider Jamie Laboucaine. And last but not least, thanks also, of course, to farm writer Alan Gabert. Today's music tracks were Coming Back by Lobo Loco and Earth and Sun, Leading Me On by Derek Clegg, and Acoustic Romance and Dusty by Crowander. That's our time for today, but we'll be back in a week with more from the Glacier FarmMedia family of publications. You've been listening to Between the Rows, and I'm your host this week, Dave Bedard. Thanks for listening.
I've been farming my whole life, and the one thing you can always count on is change. And now there's a new generation of inoculants from Lalaman Plant Care. New engineered granules and Lalfix spherical for pulses and soybeans that provide improved handling and accurate metering. New Rhizobium and Lalfix Pro Yield that deliver improved nitrogen fixation and iron uptake in soybeans. I've seen a lot of change, but this Lalaman company, well, this changes everything. Contact your Lalaman sales representative today.